All right. Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world. And welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a fantastic discussion on tap. I am very, very excited to be moderating this discussion. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded. So if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during our presentation you have a question for any of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use that go question and answer tab there on your interface and submit your questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can. I believe we are actually going to be taking audience questions throughout the webinar. So if you have a question, please don't wait for the question and answer session because you may be too late. But we do encourage as many questions as possible. We also have a very interactive chat feature, so we do encourage your comments on that as well. So please feel free to use that as early and as often as you would like. And then finally, at the end of today's webinar, we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you will be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is replatforming legacy packaged applications block by block with Minecraft and so many other things. And I'm so excited, like I said, about this discussion. With me today is Michael Villiger, who is the Senior Technical Partner Developer at Dynatrace. Hi, Michael. Thanks so much for joining me today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
All right. We also have Phillip Lamb, who is the Solutions Architect at Red Hat. Phillip, once again, thank you so much for joining me as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Charlie.
All right, guys, let's kick off this discussion. First of all, before we do, want to ask the public, please chat us where you are joining us from. I would love to see who's joining us and where they're dialing in from. So please go ahead and do that in the chat if you get a chance. But let's kick off the topic, which is replatforming legacy packaged applications. And this is definitely a topic that is quite relevant today. We've had a lot of conversations on DevOps.com and TechStrong TV about the idea of more organizations that are adopting open source technologies, and as such, they've had to work a lot with their legacy infrastructure and applications to make that happen. So. But it's always interesting to hear like individual case studies, what folks are doing, and from the, obviously from the Red Hat OpenShift perspective and Dynatrace and its role in observability. So interesting, take on replatforming legacy packaged applications. I know that there's going to be a lot of great information that we're going to be talking about today. But Phillip, let's go ahead and maybe you and I kind of kick off the conversation with really what you guys are seeing as, as a provider, OpenShift, a provider of an open source architecture there. I'd really love to kind of get your perspective on what you guys are seeing from a market perspective, and maybe what some of the what are you seeing from a kind of an individual project perspective?
Sure. So, I mean, there's a huge and growing demand for moving your applications into containers, and a lot of people think, Kubernetes. Okay, well, we'll just build that out ourselves, and we'll get to the time suck of some of these things in a minute. But one of the things that we offer with OpenShift is basically the Terminator T1000 version of Kubernetes, enterprise grade. Bulletproof, a ton of baked-in features, and that's one of the things that we've kind of been seeing adopted more and more. Is this this kind of gets into the lift and shift approach, which is something that we often see, moving applications out of on-prem into a container-based system that's going to allow you to both scale up and out into the cloud. And we see a very large mix of utilization, whether it's on-prem or on cloud. And we're pride ourselves on being able to basically provide access to container platforms from wherever you are in your kind of infrastructure journey.
Okay, so you mentioned the term lift and shift, and I hear that a lot. And I'm kind of two minds when it comes to lift and shift, because I almost feel like if an organization can lift and shift a technology, that something is going to break along the way. That there's really no such thing as kind of a seamless lift and shift. So what are you guys seeing? Am I wrong here? Is it really easy enough to do lift and shift, or are there certain things that have to be adjusted and reworked to accommodate, moving from a legacy application, packaged application to an open source?
So, I mean, it really depends on the application. And I realize that's almost a non-answer to say, well, it depends. So, of course,
yeah, sure.
I mean, I've seen throughout my career, so a little bit of background, I was a developer for 15 years until I joined Red Hat about 6 months ago as a solutions architect. And, I have worked on, I've played all sorts of various roles from, a kind of an ER doctor. We have this site that's completely busted and we have to fix it, to greenfield applications with, like one of the examples, a great example of this is, Netflix. People are like, hey, Netflix is amazing. They're super agile, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, because they started from the ground up with all of that in mind. But not everybody has had the opportunity or the benefit of kind of experience to implement things like that. So, when we say lift and shift, I think I'm going to use an elephant in the room, as it were. There's actually a really cool ebook that I think we're going to put into the chat here. That's basically it's called "Teaching an Elephant to Dance." It's a DevOps transformation guide that we have available as a free download. But one of the things that it talks about there is every organization approaches things differently, and their internal organizations approach things differently as well. And so the parable here is the 5 blind men who are presented with an elephant, and one touches the leg and says, "Oh, it's a tree." The other touches the side and says, "Oh, it's a wall." The tail, it's a rope, et cetera, et cetera. So when you think lift and shift, you're not only lifting and shifting the software itself, but you're also needing to lift and shift that culture. And I will beat the elephant analogy to death. Imagine lifting and shifting an elephant, right? You need like a Sikorsky helicopter to move the thing over. But if you start to break it down into its individual pieces, and yet another elephant example, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You start to break that down, then it becomes much more easy to lift and to shift.
Well, Michael, I want to bring you into the conversation as well, because there's a lot of goodness to be had with this conversation, and when we're talking about lifting and shifting, obviously, what you can see is going to be it's going to have a large impact on how successful you are. So, where does observability fit into the equation?
Yeah, so I've always thought that there's a couple of different ways that it factors into a lot of these modernization efforts, right? So in my example that, maybe we'll walk through some of the further details of it a little bit later, but I use Dynatrace to kind of determine the footprint of my workload and where the bottlenecks were. And addressing some of those bottlenecks were one of the reasons behind my modernization efforts, right? A lot of organizations do something similar, so it's one of the other things that I did a lot of, giving talks on, like in 2017 or so, was utilizing observability tooling like Dynatrace to kind of mock up what a modernization end state might look like, right? So if anybody remembers the idea of a well-structured monolith, right? Taking something like a well-structured monolith and actually carving those pieces off, mocking them up as services inside of Dynatrace so that we'd see, what that connectivity might look like. Because sometimes people end up forgetting that, piece XYZ actually talk to these, 16 databases over here. That's obviously a wild exaggeration, but probably not as much of an exaggeration as you think in some cases. And one of the reasons why, I kind of came up with this idea of, doing my best to modernize Minecraft as an example was Minecraft is something that's closed source. I can't touch it. I can't actually modernize it. That's not a possibility, right? I could look at this like, if I was trying to take, database from vendor XYZ and run that inside of my Kubernetes platform, right? I can't alter the source code of the database server. I can only understand what the database server needs, what the database server is interacting with, and I can only understand, what are the performance characteristics and availability characteristics of that service, right?
Okay. All right. Great. And I want to get into the specifics of the Minecraft endeavor. But before we do, I do want to throw a question out to the audience, and I'm really interested in learning who out there has tried to, or is working on, or has worked on replatforming some of their legacy applications, and what type of experience do they have, and has it been a positive experience or a negative experience, and why? So I'm giving everybody a little bit of schoolwork to do while we're having this conversation, because I'm really, really interested in finding out what's happening out there. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'd like to follow on to what Mike was talking about with the closed, contained nature of Minecraft. You can't see into it. I think that also applies to, we see this with government, and we see this, for example, with the financial sector. I mean, if you're a COBOL developer now, you can write your own paycheck, like no problem. And so if for all intents and purposes, a lot of these like really legacy applications that are still running on tape, those things are basically as closed as the Minecraft system is.
Sure. Yeah. And it's so funny that you mentioned COBOL, because who knew that COBOL development would be such a hot job these days?
Right.
But yeah, I guess everything old is new again. So, so let's talk a little bit about then where we are kind of in the market for these organizations that are shifting and replatforming. Phillip, over at Red Hat, what are you seeing? I mean, are you seeing a lot of organizations that are replatforming their legacy packaged applications and moving to open source, or is it something that's just kind of maybe starting up and maybe not so much gaining, as much traction as maybe we're just on the first leg of it, if you will?
Yeah, I think it's a mix, and it really depends on which kind of sector we're talking about. I mean, the commercial sector is always going to be kind of ahead of the game on things like this. But I had mentioned, from either public sector or fintech, both of those places tend to move at a much more deliberate pace. And so what you'll see is, in terms of adoption, we see a lot of this. Individuals, and this is one of the things I like to focus on, is the developer aspect. Like, focus on the developer. We need to get the developer on board first. What we see is, individual developers, and I'm a perfect example of this because I did that when I worked for the state of North Carolina, coming in and saying, okay, we have this existing system, right? But we want it to be more performant. We want it to be more stable, more available, more accessible, whatever. I have an idea, and I'm just gonna, kind of the old school, go off into a garage and try it. And you're seeing that play out, especially in the public sector side of things, with a very short proof of concept approach. That then lays the groundwork for further adoption and further implementation and across the kind of the application stack.
So I wonder if over the last year or so, with the pandemic hitting and so many organizations that are going through their digital transformation, accelerating their digital transformations, did that have any impact on whether organizations have decided to maybe take their legacy applications and replatform them, take that, you can go that open source route, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, I can't name names, but there's a 3-letter agency that we've worked with on the Red Hat side, and with Dynatrace as well, that was facing these issues. All of their offices were closed at the beginning of the pandemic. people couldn't get access to the services they needed, and they had to very quickly modernize this legacy application. And that's, I mean, that's a perfect example of what you've seen. You have this sudden realization. It's kind of the reverse of the realization we've had, which is that you don't actually need to necessarily be in an office all the time, right? So that's kind of a positive. But the flip side to that is that your existing infrastructure is most likely not set up to handle that really distributed aspect of things. I can't remember the exact details, but there's an example of this, which was, I want to say it was a license for, I think it was for a VPN that was IP based, and so they were using the network at this office had this VPN access that was easy to set up. It was designed so that the few people that were working from home would be able to log into the servers that they needed to. And then they very quickly realized when everybody went remote, oh, this is very, very expensive. We didn't really think about the longer term, if we need to expand this to grow it, what impact that's going to have. And they ended up with a bill, several tens of thousands of dollars higher than what they had expected when they first started. And they were really scrambling. So it's kind of this Darwinian evolution thing that's forced these companies to look to other ways to innovate.
So if I could actually chime in on a couple of things there too, right? So when we're thinking about this, what have we had to do for the last 16 months, right? Anybody who is in retail was effectively forced to be digital.
Sure.
Right. Even if you weren't ready to be digital, you had to be digital, right? Because that's all there was. Brick and mortar was over, right? Brick and mortar was forced to be over temporarily for us all. Right. So we saw a lot of organizations rapidly accelerate their efforts in the transformation. Right. And those transformation efforts are always going to be a mixture of, these lifting and shifting and replatforming efforts versus those modernization efforts where you might be rewriting things. Right. And we've seen some fascinating efforts, like big money efforts in hospitality industries where you're like, okay, well, where is that coming from? Right. But it's they're using this as an opportunity to make some of those changes that perhaps would have been difficult to make if they were under their normal operational burden of operating, because what were they because people weren't staying in hotels and things like that for a little while there. Right. So to me personally, I found it fascinating what some of these organizations were investing in during that time and how they were funding that, because they were funding it in a big way.
Yeah.
There's another concrete brick and mortar example of that is, here in Texas, things are open, things are relatively back to normal. But one thing I did notice, and you probably have this, Mike, Charlene, you probably have noticed the same thing, is that restaurants, there's no printed menu anymore. There's nothing. There's a QR code that you scan, right? And that's a way that these brick and mortar places have had to adapt to these changing circumstances. And then putting that aspect of their business online has not only reduced costs, but also increased a little bit the safety factor. And I mean that's a perfect example of, you identify the individual portions of your business or your application and find where you can modernize most quickly and most effectively, and in the most efficient way possible.
Yeah, and we're also talking a lot about a customer experience and being able to enable a high quality customer experience, especially during the pandemic when the customers basically it was much easier for them to move on to a different vendor if they weren't getting what they needed. And to your point, Philip, now that restaurants have these QR codes and they don't have regular menus, that's actually kind of a way for that they're using the technology that they've had to invest in to actually create a better customer experience for a lot of their customers. I mean, obviously, some folks still prefer to have a regular menu, and I'm sure that the restaurants will be more than happy to get them. So maybe it's not such a great customer experience for you, but for most people, it's no great shakes for them to pull out their smartphone and just hit the QR code and just have it right there on their fingertips. I imagine that there are lots of other organizations that are kind of pivoting now that we are close to post-pandemic, and they're actually making hay out of these transformations that they've had to do over the last 18 months or 16 months to actually improve their processes, to actually be of benefit to the customers as well. So go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, with that though, are there some situations in which organizations have lifted and shifted or transformed that in a way that maybe was not the most beneficial for the organization? Maybe it was better if they, rather than lift and shift, they decide they should have maybe perhaps just started again from scratch and modernized. Are there any instances when replatforming just doesn't work for an organization?
I can. Mike, do you want to take this first, or?
Well, no. I mean, I'd love to get your take on that, Phil. And then I actually have an example going back before we were phrasing things as digital transformation. So, but please go first.
It's like
Phil.
20 years or so.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that if I had to slap a warning on modernization, it would be for organizations that are resistant to cultural change or have like deeply embedded ways of doing things that are, this kind of tribal knowledge sort of aspect. If you don't enable your cultural change to happen first across whatever segments of the business that you're looking at, you will fail, because especially with this adoption of open source technology, open source and legacy ways of working do not mesh. I mean, you can force them, you can shoehorn them in if you really, really try, but that's not sustainable.
So let's have this culture conversation then, because it keeps coming up. And but Michael, before we do that, I want to let you do your pre-digital transformation. Tell us what you were thinking about before.
Yeah, I mean,
we get into that culture.
For sure, and I'll bring it all back around again after I'm done as well, right?
All right.
So I have a great example, and I'm gonna leave all of the names and everything out to protect the innocent and not so innocent, right? But I've been involved in situations where a modernization effort was underway, and it was less about modernization and more about creating something on what was at the time like the new stack for the time. Mm-hmm. Right. And this keeps coming to mind because Phillip keeps bringing up this teaching an elephant to dance thing. Right. And this was actually a Hadoop story from the early days of Hadoop. Right. So, and anybody who's been even tangentially associated with big data knows that, like, back in, was it like 2008 or so, 2009, something like that. Like, everything was a big data problem. Everybody,
right.
Everybody needed a Hadoop. Everybody, every single thing that you had to do, every problem you had was going to be solved in that way. Right. Mm-hmm. And we had a situation where we attempted to solve it in that way. The first time it didn't work. So we added another layer. Right. Another layer on something that happened to be hot at the time. Right. That didn't work out. So we added another layer of something that happened to be hot at the time. And it eventually got to the point where, like, this business unit was a couple hundred people. It was like 2 or 3 years later. MVP wasn't even delivered yet. And they're like, okay, stop. Right. We're going to shrink this team from a couple hundred people down to like 20. And you folks have like 3 months to come up with MVP. And you reduce to the max, and you simplify. And it was an example where just because you got that hammer, everything isn't a nail. Right. And when we come back to bringing that into a cultural decision, right? This was kind of in the days of ivory tower architects that weren't super closely, in the trenches with the developers, and the developers were handing things over the fence to, the ops folks. Like, we started talking about DevOps, right? We were undergoing an agile transformation, but we were trying to shoehorn those old ideas in there, right? And one of the things that, like, honestly would have solved all of that was communication, right? I gave a lot of these talks, like, back in 2015, right? Like, did a couple of ones with, like, Gene Kim and stuff like that. And one of the things I always talk about is, we keep trying to say that this is not, it's not necessarily a tool problem, it's a cultural problem. So yes, right. Most emphatically yes, because if your culture is broken, no tool is going to fix that. Yeah. Right. One of the interesting aspects to that, though, is, like, if everybody isn't speaking the same language, how do you communicate? Right. So, and one of the ways you can unify the language that they're speaking is, again, through, making sure everybody is seeing the same thing. Like, maybe a little bit of an observability plug in there, make sure that everybody is seeing the same thing and looking at those things kind of in a holistic way. Right. And I used to talk about, making your monitoring tooling the lingua franca across the organization. It gives them that common language that they can all speak and all explain what it is that they're seeing. That doesn't eliminate all of the burdens, but it eliminates some of the troubleshooting clashes that can occur in organizations that are in the midst of their cultural transformation. Right.
Right.
I'll just add that in addition, so one of the client that I had mentioned earlier, that the 3-letter agency, one of the things that one of the solutions architects that I was speaking with, who had done some of the rollout for that, had said was that Dynatrace specifically played a role in encouraging their cultural change, because it allowed them to have that window that everybody could see very quickly. Oh, there's some lag here, there's performance issues here. Like, kind of leveling the playing field almost, as it were, in terms of the inner workings of your software. And that was a big thing. Is like, hey, we did this, and then that it's this beneficial kind of cycle, right? It's like you get this one win, and then that motivates people, and that, again, culture, right? But you need to be motivated, and the best way, in my opinion, to get motivated is for everybody to be on the same page, for everybody to have these insights available to them, and that open dialogue, right?
So where do you see organizations then kind of falling down when they are embarking upon this, the replatforming projects, and just kind of making that shift, if you will, to a more open and maybe even vendor agnostic platform, and just getting off that legacy infrastructure and having those legacy packaged applications? Where do you see organizations not succeeding?
All right, Phil, I think you're going to have the best insight there. I have a couple of different things I can say, but
yeah, I mean, let's go to you first, because I need to chew on that for a minute, if you don't mind.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stump the panelists here.
Oh, no, it's okay. Not stump.
Yep.
Just Lynn.
Yep. So historically, some of the things that I've seen there are, again, tool fit, right? As we look into, perhaps rolling out a platform that had no solution for persistent storage when you had a need for persistent storage. That's not a great tool fit, right? And it goes back to some of the reasons why I made some of the choices that I made in my own modernization story, right? And then as we look towards, what are some of the things that Kubernetes does well for us, and how is the Kubernetes ecosystem shifting in order to better solve some of those problems? Right? Like, one of the things that I dove really, this is going to be crazy, right? But one of the things that I dove really, yeah, right. I dove deep into the bowels of Kubernetes around the CSI, right, which is basically how you provide storage to your Kubernetes cluster and pods, right? And one of the really fascinating things that has changed in the last couple of months is who actually provides those, who provides that layer? Where's that layer coming from, right? And it used to be that layer was always in upstream Kubernetes, right? Now it isn't. Right now, the vendors realize that, hey, for their cloud platform, whether that be AWS, whether that be GCP, whether that be vSphere, the cloud vendors themselves are going to have a better understanding of what's necessary for both the CPI as well as the CSI, like all the underpinnings, all the stuff that Kubernetes abstracts away. It's all still there, right? And it's just, where are you actually getting that interface code from? And it turns out that relying on the Kubernetes upstream maintainers to solve that release cadence was better left to the vendors, right? It was better left to the cloud vendors, so that they could own that and they could release that and maintain that quality themselves, right? And all those things kind of, sometimes conspire to give us some issues along the way, right? Phillip, you have a look like you might have.
I mean, the main thing that I kind of wanted to say is in terms of failure points, and I've seen this in my own personal experience, is this idea that we're gonna pick something and we're gonna stick with it, right? Okay, we're gonna deploy everything on AWS. Oh, well, great, but is that going to really apply to every single one of your applications, or do you want to be able to have that ability to be a hybrid cloud, where you've got some stuff running on Azure, you've got some stuff on GCP, you've got some stuff on AWS. And that's one of the ways that OpenShift really shines, is it allows you to have that hybrid experience, so you avoid those issues. The other side of that, I think, would also be you really. So when I first started with the state of North Carolina, I was brought on because I had a very large amount of open source experience that you don't really find a lot, or you didn't back then, in the public sector very much at all. And I feel like the value that I brought to the table was this kind of deep understanding of I'm going to use the culture word again, the culture behind open source, right? The kind of inner machinations of how open source functions and how code gets built, and that collaborative nature is something that, if you want to adopt open source technologies, then you really need to adopt the open source mindset as well. And if you take this, okay, we're going to buy some Kubernetes, off the shelf, and expect it just to kind of all fall together without any sort of collaboration or discussion or upstream improvements, for example, then you're probably not going to do so well. But if you can embrace the kind of somewhat combative nature of that exists there in the open source community, and these understandings that what you're going to be building now may change, right? It's not going to be set in stone. Then you're going to do better.
What about addressing the complexity that exists with Kubernetes and working with containers and such? And that's something that we've covered quite a bit on Container Journal and DevOps.com. Folks they find Kubernetes difficult sometimes, more often than not. We're just going to use the word difficult. How do you address that when you're talking to a customer and they're saying, this is great, I love the idea of moving my legacy application to something that is much more open and accessible and digital and customer first and all the benefits and bells and whistles that OpenShift and open source in general provides. But the managing of it is going to drive me up a wall. So how do you guys deal with that?
Well, I mean, I'd say the crawl, walk, run approach is probably the best one to take in situations like that, where you're not you've got to combat a bunch of different preconceived notions around your culture, your development methodologies, and whatnot. But start small, right? Don't feel like it's okay. Allow yourself to accept that you don't have to modernize everything all at once. Start
Don't
small.
have to eat the elephant.
Yeah. See, I wasn't going to say it because I've already said it like 8 times. But yes, exactly. So you want to start small, and that's going to allow you to really hone your collaboration and your kind of mental toolkit. So that's going to allow you to see in a relatively low stress kind of way the ways that, Kubernetes does this differently. We need to make sure that we've addressed that, and we've identified that early on because we started with such a kind of a small self-contained element. And it's it really is that proof of concept model, I think, that helps to avoid some issues like that. Mike, you look like you were going to say something.
Oh, well, it's just I love the whole industry change through all of this. It absolutely positively doesn't make me want to buy a sailboat and stay on that sailboat for a few years until things have quieted down a little bit. That's absolutely not the case at all. So being right,
I don't know if you're being facetious there. If you really do want to buy that sailboat and just say,
maybe a little bit, right? And even if 2020 didn't happen, this was something that was in my head in like 2018. All right, but we're getting better, right? We're getting better. And one of the things that I see a lot here, again, going back to like let's look at this as a POC, right? We peel off either a chunk of a distributed architecture, or if we don't have a distributed architecture, right? We have something that's legacy and it's packaged, right? Maybe we do what we can to bring it over to the new platform and learn what we can about operating it on this new platform in a way in which we understand clearly what's happening, because we have clear visibility into what's happening, right? Because at the end of the day, we need to know what this looks like to the outside world, or well, by outside world, I mean not the three of us, the people that are actually using these applications or platforms that we're either building, operating, or both, right? We need to understand what's happening there, because at the end of the day, if we've done this and we've got this awesome operational excellence, but the customers hate what it is that we did, like it's all slow for them or functionality is garbage, like why did we go through all of that effort, right? So having that end-to-end visibility across what you're doing is really important. And one of the things that having great observability does is it helps to, some humans are visual creatures, some like to read, we like numbers, having all of those things that help us reason with the new platform. And it's a lot less scary when we understand what's actually happening, where we have the ability to understand what's happening.
Also add that it helps you save money, as well, because the time and the time and treasure investments on the various parts of your application are not going to give you the same benefit across the board. So and this is where for example, Dynatrace really comes in, is being able to help you identify early on those kind of SLO type aspects of your application that we need to improve here first. And I'll throw out a pitch real quick for one of the things that we offer at Red Hat is this kind of hand-holding through that modernization process. So Red Hat Consulting has, for example, on the Java side, we have this application modernization tool set where we take migration analytics and we look at, does it make business sense to migrate? Then we look at the organizational readiness, and this is where the culture thing comes in.
Mhm.
Then we have this product called Pathfinder, which is basically a container readiness assessment. So it identifies for this specific thing, where do you start? Which aspects of your application should be prioritized for migration? And so we help you identify those, and then we stay with you the whole way to help implement those as well.
Cool. Well, Michael, I feel like we're 20 minutes to the top of the hour already, and we haven't even talked about Minecraft. So, well, first of all, we talked about Minecraft. Tell us about Minecraft. Tell us the story of Minecraft.
So I had a whole thing about my whole journey of basically what happened was Minecraft was something that a lot of technologists were starting to get back into during the pandemic, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing it for a long time, first by myself, then with my nephew, then by myself again, then with friends over the internet. And the whole idea here is that when I'm talking about Minecraft, as the technologist that I am, I'm not talking about like vanilla Minecraft where you're punching trees, getting logs, and building a literal mud hut. Right.
I feel personally attacked.
Right. Yeah. And well, Phillip and I were actually just talking about that exact thing this morning. So it's a little topical for us. But, but I'm talking about modded Minecraft where I'm building nuclear reactors that are, utilizing fission to create steam, to drive steam turbines, to generate power, to run machines that are turning ore into dust, into ingots, and like all this automation. I have literal computers running inside of Minecraft that are running Lua script to control these nuclear reactors. Like modded Minecraft is this whole thing, right?
Wow.
And because it's such this whole thing, right? Minecraft was created so that you could punch trees, turn them into logs, and build mud huts. Right. So people have injected all of this other stuff into that. All of this other stuff is available in the Java version of Minecraft due to the properties of Java and how, classes and things like that can be transformed at runtime. Right. But again, because it was never designed to do all that stuff, the architecture of Minecraft itself is kind of garbage. Everything is running in a single thread. Everything has to complete in a certain amount of time, or else that everything else gets skipped, right? Mm-hmm. It'll throw things away. So as a player, my user experience is really bad because that tree that I punched and turned into a log, right? Or that mud hut that I was building, my blocks all of a sudden disappear because there's a state mismatch. The state that I have as a user is different than what the state is on the server side. And I had this old server that I built in like 2014, and it just wasn't passing mustard anymore, right? So I went through and again, because it's Java based, I could mock it up in Dynatrace. I could actually tell Dynatrace, hey, here's the Java function that represents the start of that tick, right? And then let me know if that takes more than 50 milliseconds. Right. So I had that ability from day one to kind of understand the characteristics of the old system that helped me understand that I was CPU and memory bound and that I had IO problems. Right. And, since I wanted that modern application platform density, I ended up migrating from something that was like VMs on a box, moving that over through a couple of steps along the way, right? But eventually ending up with running those things on Kubernetes so that I could actually deliver like 12 different server instances to all my friends, right? And so it ended up being this whole thing.
Did you re-platform to OCP before you implemented Dynatrace, or was the Dynatrace side of things on, you said it was vSphere, I think, was that in place beforehand, and that's what helped you identify how best to provision your pod sizes and things like that?
So I am a goofball, and I've actually been using Dynatrace to monitor Minecraft since like 2015, basically as long as I've been an employee, because I'm like, okay, this actually seems like it gives me all sorts of ideas. It helps me learn how my own product works. I know how to operate Minecraft servers, and then the information that Dynatrace provides me around what's actually happening around that user experience, as well as the hows and whys, right? Garbage collection, all that other crazy stuff, right? I've got all that there, and it just fires off alerts if one of my players is having a bad experience, right? So I actually had Dynatrace first. And then by doing that, that helped me size my environment properly. And again, it's a little bit of a weird thing, right? But the requirements for Minecraft are so crazy from like a memory perspective that helped me ensure that my worker nodes were big enough to have that single pod on it. That's how big they are. I needed to make, some folks might have worker nodes that are 4 CPUs and 8 gigs of memory or something like that. That wasn't going to fly here because that single Minecraft instance consumed 11 gigs of memory, right? So I had that information, I had that visibility from the get-go, and that helped me ensure that the poor decisions that I made at first weren't as bad as they could have been. I made poor decisions in the beginning. We all do. Everything doesn't work perfectly from the get-go with a lot of these things, right? But having that visibility helped me understand why, right? So Phillip, right? Requests and limits for CPU, right? CPU throttling in Kubernetes just works awesome, and it's really easy for everybody to understand exactly how that works, right?
Except,
right? So that's not true at all, right? That if you Google that, you will find like literally hundreds of articles about requests are completely sensical, but the way limits work and are implemented has changed several times. And it isn't always clear what the impact of your throttling is, right? But having the observability across the platform, it helped me understand exactly how many Minecraft instances can I run across my cluster. If I'm starting to get throttled, which one is it that's actually going to start slowing down first? If it is being throttled, does it matter, right? Because if I'm being throttled and everything is okay, well, maybe I can just deal with that, right? And have that density that I get by implementing the limits properly, right? So it's kind of a fascinating journey of trial and error enabled by the ability to really understand what the outcome of my experiment is.
Yeah, and it sounds like you have created along the way an exceptional user experience for everybody else who's connecting to your Minecraft server.
That's the general idea, right? So, and I see there's a couple of folks that are, wondering. It was a long and arduous journey to actually get to talking about the Minecraft side of things, and we've all seen too many slides for like the last year. So we tried to do this as kind of like a panel, right, to talk about some of the things that take us towards doing something like that, right? And I'll tell everybody, like, one of the reasons why I was alluding to like CPIs and CSIs a while back, right, is world gen in Minecraft is like severely IO bound, and I'm a nerd, and like I built a vSAN, all flash vSAN cluster to run Minecraft for my friends with like 10 gig networking. And I have like an actual rack in my basement, and there's like a whole
That's
thing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. That's awesome.
So, but in order to get there, like it's again, as we start to think about, okay, well, if I look at that as the operator versus the developer, we have some contracts with each other on what it is that we're providing to each other. And then community comes into this as well, because I found a lot of valuable insight in the community on, well, geez, how the heck do I actually deploy VMware's CPI and CSI into OCP? How do I do that? And I actually found a lot of really great, awesome, community articles around that. And it was a relatively trouble-free process. And I see folks have really started to kind of get engaged around some of that in the chat. So I think we got to let Phillip and Charlene, bring us into a couple of other discussion points here. But if you have specific questions about this that I can answer for you, please let us know.
Yes, please do let us know. James is asking if you could provide a wiki URL for the Minecraft on Kubernetes. So Michael, that's for you. So I guess everybody wants to know, how you did that, because that's a pretty amazing thing, actually, if you think about the just the impact of having that that accelerated capability in Minecraft. My son gets excited when they have a Minecraft update and the paddles are smoother. They smoothed out the paddles in the latest version. He's over the moon thrilled with that. So I think it's
goats now too.
Yeah, he said, "Oh my God, we have goats now." So goats. that's I think it's really cool when you can when you can really make an impact on a cultural phenomenon like that. I think it's great. But kind of turning it or bringing it back to the business perspective, Phillip, when you are talking with organizations, and they do have this need or desire to adopt OpenShift in their organizations and replatform a lot of their legacy stuff. I'm sure there's a level of hesitancy there, and we've talked about how to approach this. But do you guys actually kind of go into kind of the role of everybody in the organization who would be involved in this project and kind of help them understand exactly who's going to be in charge of what and who's responsible for what, or how do you guys go about doing like your hand holding and your project implementation, things of that nature?
Sure. So, I mean, I can kind of speak broadly to that. I think it really depends on what the customer wants. I mean, we have a full suite of consulting services available, and if you want somebody to come in or like a team, like a Tiger team, to do all the work for you, and then report back, we're capable of doing that. But I would say our preferred methodology is again, this goes back to our open source nature, right? Is this collaboration that exists between teams. So we want to be involved with your developers and with your SREs and with your ops guys and with your engineering managers. We want to have them all at the table, because that's going to give us a better idea of what the culture situation is like, right?
Yeah, and do you actually, when you're having those conversations, are you finding that it is an easier conversation to have these days than maybe a year or 2 years ago?
Yeah. I think that the pandemic and the associated lockdowns have really opened people's eyes to the possibilities that exist out there, and we alluded to this earlier with what other enterprises are doing. Your competition is going to do better than you if you don't start to take a fresh look at things. And I'd say that that's really removed some of the challenges internally, I think, because you can point to having examples out there, whether it's an open source, it's like that's how I learned to code, right? Was somebody provided me an example line of code or an example function, and I kind of broke it apart and figured it out. With the pandemic, you're actually able to reference these external implementations that have ideas that have been used by your competition, and say, hey, we need to do this too. And it snowballs. I think it ends up snowballing in a good way.
That's great. That's great. And I imagine it also a lot of the conversation has also kind of shifted toward not only being able, not only the technology talk, but also the business benefits and the customer, obviously the customer experience, because we've talked about that in the past already. But it seems like the more parts of the business are getting involved in the conversation these days as well.
Thankfully, I'm so happy to see that, because one of the things I put in the handouts there, this was a PDF looking at specifically for the federal space, modernizing the monolith. And one of the things that they mentioned as being very important is getting executive buy-in early on. Because if you don't have that, I feel like the best way that you can move forward with app modernization is you start with the developer and you get them on your side. You convince them that this is something that needs to happen. We'll start small, et cetera, et cetera. And then you use that proof of concept to go to your executives and say, hey, we have this great thing that we can do. Let's try it. And then having that conversation around, arming yourself with, the whys of why this is going to be great for your business. And if you don't have executive buy-in, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah, that's obviously not only, I think it's one of the most important things, but it's also a very important first step. Is once you have that buy-in, then you pretty much can go whichever direction you need to go. But without the buy-in, yeah, to your point, it's you're dead in the water basically. So so guys, we are 5 minutes to the top of the hour. And so we're going to need to start kind of shutting down the conversation, but I do want to give both of you an opportunity to kind of offer up any last minute tidbits, best practices, whatever you want to share with the audience before we close things down. Phillip, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I'd say don't be afraid. If you're, I like I said, I tend to focus on the developer angle of things. Don't be afraid to get out there and try. I think that there's something to be said, within reason, for asking for forgiveness and not for permission, especially with apps that might be handling very sensitive information, or maybe not that, but business critical applications. Try it and see what you can do, and you're gonna have to do the work. You're gonna have to put in the time. In my experience, it was in the 5 to 9. Like the Dolly Parton song goes, it was in that time that I learned all this stuff. But there's use the community, leverage the community, because to Mike's point earlier, I mean, there's not a book out there that gives you the rundown of everything. You need to engage with other people and talk to them, and the open source community is really a great way to do that. So yeah.
Yep. And to Paul's point, like, definitely, right? Because it one of the nice things about using something like this as an example, right? Even for your own kind of, kicking tires on the platform, right? You're going to learn something along the way. And then when you're done, you're going to have something that maybe you and the kids might be able to play with. Right. So, I definitely love, Phillip's comment around, giving it a shot and not being afraid, assuming that you're embarking on this with the right mindset and initial thing. Like, probably not the application that handles the most sensitive of your information. Right. That might not be the greatest first step. However, again, like I've been talking about this for like 5 years now, and some organizations are like, you know what? We need that like multi-billion-dollar win for the first workload we move to the new platform. So they do need to bite off that huge chunk. It's probably not the way I would do it, but organizations have been successful doing that. But to Phillip's point around, like, there isn't a book, right? There might be books, but those books are not written about your organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very, very true. And great comments to both of you guys. I do real quick, because we have 2 minutes to the top of the hour, want to point out that we have a plethora of handouts, things in the handout section for you guys to take and download. I want to give folks enough time to do that. But please go ahead and do that if you're going to do it, because when at the top of the hour, when we close out this webinar, it's
gone.
Not going to be there anymore. So please do that now if you want. And also, just a quick reminder to the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the conversation, or if you just want to listen to it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. We will be sending out an email after today's webinar that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be on the devops.com platform website. You can always go look for it there. Just go to devops.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. It should be right there waiting for you. And also, before we close things out, I do want to do the drawing for the 4 $25 Amazon gift card winners that I mentioned at the top of the hour. Our winners today are Mark M. Congratulations, Mark. Logan A. Congratulations, Logan. Bianca P. Congratulations, Bianca. And finally, Gerald W. Congratulations, Gerald. We'll be following up with all 4 of you guys by email. So check your inbox. That's how we're going to be getting those gift cards over to you. If you don't see anything in your inbox, please check your spam folder. Michael and Philip, what a great conversation. I had such a good time. I hope the audience got as much out of it as I did. And truly, there are some Minecraft fans in the audience. So great conversation, and also lots and lots of really great information about shifting to open source and using OpenShift and the whole the lift and shift and replatforming legacy applications. It's a topic, like I said at the top of the hour, it's definitely a topic that is relevant in today's business environment. So thank you both very much for your time and for your information and your expertise. Very much appreciated.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
right.
Thanks.
Yeah. I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.
Thanks.